Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host for the next 2 hours. My name is Kev Baker, and this is the Kev Baker Show. Now, we're coming to you live from the smart land of Glasgow, in the heartland of Scotland. We go all the way to Australia, back to Alaska, over to Norway, and then to Nebraska. And we do that thanks to Truth Frequency Radio, tfrlive.com, where we give you protection from deception, and where we say silence is consent. And I remember listening to Chris and Cherie Geo way back in the day before I even had the idea of having my own show. And Chris and Cherie, they're the brains and the beauty behind TFR. And some of my favourite listening experiences when they would be getting into the woo, as I call it, the paranormal, the supernatural, the cryptids, and there's many of them to choose from. So I myself, over the years, I've always gravitated towards that kind of information, and obviously it's a no-brainer that the show that I do tends to lean towards the weird, the high strangeness, the woo, as we all love to call it on here. And from time to time we are blessed with guests who are absolute experts in their given field of study. And today we have got somebody that is an expert on all things woo. Now, it's really synchronistic. I've probably told this story to you once or twice before, but the website that this man is responsible for bringing to us is one of the websites that I've often gone to source material for the show. The website is Phantoms and Monsters, and the man himself, our special guest today, is Lon Strickler. Now, I had the pleasure of having 2 shows so far with Lon on Warrior Mode. And for those who don't know who he is, Lon is a Fortean researcher, author, and publisher of the syndicated Phantoms and Monsters blog. He began the blog back in 2005, which has steadily grown in popularity and is read daily by tens of thousands of paranormal enthusiasts, investigators, and those seeking the truth. Now, his research and reports have been featured in hundreds of online media sources, and I can attest to that, folks. Do a Google search of this guy. He's everywhere. And several of these published reports have been presented on various television segments, including the History Channel's Ancient Aliens, Sci-Fi's Paranormal Witness, Fact or Faked, Paranormal Files, and Destination America's Monsters and Mysteries in America. He's been interviewed on several radio broadcasts, including multiple guest appearances on the amazing Coast to Coast AM. He was also featured on Destination America's Monsters and Mysteries in America television show for the Sykesville Monster episode, and that's something we're going to be finding out about today. But Lon doesn't stop there, because he's written at least 8 books and is currently the host of Arcane Radio on the Paranormal King Radio Network. You can find a lot of his stuff over on YouTube at the Beyond Explanation channel. Please check that out. So without any further ado, let me bring the man himself onto the show. What a pleasure, what an honour to have Lon Strickler here with us tonight. Lon, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me, Kev.
Well, it's great to have you to myself. How selfish is that? But I've had to share you with Bill Bean and Travis, and as much as I love those 2 guys, I've been desperate to have a one-on-one conversation with you, because you really are, and I don't say this lightly, but you're an expert and have covered the kind of topics that I really love to get into. So I'm really looking forward to this show tonight. But before we get anywhere, Lon, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how it was you came to be the man behind phantomsandmonsters.com.
Well, it's actually a pretty long story. It started when I was young. I realized at a fairly young age I had some abilities that at the time I just didn't understand. I used to ride my bike over to the Gettysburg battlefield a lot. I lived very nearby. And I would spend summer afternoons there. I was into history even at a young age of 8 and 9 years old. And one day I was in an area that is described as Death Valley, which is, people that know the battlefield, it's in between Little Round Top, Devil's Den, and the wheat field. And it was very active during the second day of the battle. And as I was riding my bike, I had stopped and I was just observing, and all of a sudden it just, it's like all my senses heightened, and I started hearing gunfire, smelling gunpowder, drums, yells, screams, the whole 9 yards. It was just like a movie screen opened up for me. And for about 30 seconds, I feel I was right in the middle of battle. And it just faded away as quickly as it occurred. And then I realized that something, I had some type of ability or for this stuff to manifest in front of me. So, I didn't really say much about it when I was younger. My parents really never even knew anything about it. I just kind of kept a lot of that to myself. It's not like we lived in a haunted house, or I just didn't let it be known for the most part. But as I got older and got into high school, I started going out and exploring other areas, particularly areas where they had some type of conflict historically. And I would sense spirit energy. I would kind of experience some of it. And when I graduated from high school and eventually moved down to Maryland, I was involved in personal cases of hauntings and such. Now this is back in the mid 70s. So, this isn't something that was very highly accepted as it is now. You tell somebody back then you're a paranormal investigator, they kind of looked at you really funny. And but I did that for a long time. I mean, it was all word of mouth back then. We had no cell phones or anything like that. And somebody would contact me and asked if I wouldn't mind checking a location out, and that's what I did. So that leads up into May of 1981, where I had an encounter while fishing of a Bigfoot, what I assumed at the time and now know as Bigfoot. And that kind of changed my perspective on the paranormal. Because of that encounter, I later found out there had been Bigfoot encounters in the area several years previous to that. So I wanted to get an idea of what I had dealt with, what I saw, and I went back and started interviewing some of the original witnesses of an entity called the Sykesville Monster. And I was fortunate enough to know some of the people in the area, some of the relatives, and I had access to a lot of these people. And in fact, I found other witnesses that the press didn't even get to during their coverage of these incidents. So that's kind of where I got started with the cryptids. And of course, in 1988, I had another encounter with two other gentlemen of what you would call a winged humanoid. Very similar, and actually very similar to some of the encounters that we're getting now in the Chicago, Lake Michigan area. So, I've been fortunate enough to see some of this phenomena, and I'm kind of full blown into it now. And eventually in 2005, I started writing a blog, Phantoms and Monsters, and it's kind of taken off since then. So it's got me to where I am now.
Well, Lon, really interesting there when you mentioned Gettysburg, because being from the Highlands of Scotland, you throw a stone in any direction, you can land in a battlefield. And Culloden is just outside Inverness, and
Right.
it's similar, not exactly the same as what you're describing there. I've never had that kind of time slip experience, but myself and my partner, many people that still visit the battlefield today, you can't, for me personally, I didn't hear the kind of noises or smell the smells, but you can feel the atmosphere. There's just something entirely different when you step out onto that battlefield. And, growing up in the Highlands of Scotland, Loch Ness on my doorstep, I suppose I was always going to have some kind of interest in this paranormal realm. And it seems to me, though, that you, from a very early age, you've been experiencing this on and off then throughout your life, Lon, right?
Yeah, I have. I early on I didn't really understand it. I kind of got used to these things happening to me as I got older. Uh, you know, I eventually, and it later brought me to actually being trained to remote view. That was much later on, and occasionally I will help other individuals with hauntings yet, and it has been used in some of my my casework with some of these individuals.
Now, you mentioned the Sykesville monster there.
Uh-huh.
Talk to us a little bit about that then. Take us back in time to what was going on and what the Sykesville monster case entailed.
Well, early on in 1973, around that point in time, there were some incidents in the Sykesville, Maryland area, especially in the neighborhoods near the river. There were people that were experiencing break-ins and chicken pens being broke into, and eventually, actually, there was one break into someone's kitchen, another one that was in somebody's garage, and in fact, the neighborhood, it was a mostly African American neighborhood, so the Baltimore Afro-American newspaper started covering this phenomena in their newspaper, and then it started to be known nationwide. So it kind of lingered on. I didn't really know much about it. I moved down to that area in '76, and I didn't really know about the actual encounters until I had mine and started checking into it. Well, anyway, my encounter occurred in May of 1981. Spring day, I was fishing along the south branch of the Patapsco River, which is about a mile downstream from Sykesville. And as I was actually in the river, I was fly fishing. I was standing in there with my waders on, and I noticed across on the other side of the bank, on the north side of the bank, there was a dog over there just kind of moving in and out of the weeds. He wasn't bothering me, so I didn't even pay him any mind. So I was continued fishing. Then eventually, not long after that, I heard the dog yelp like it was in pain. And I looked up, and at that time I saw something large and hairy just raise up out of the weeds. I got a look at it. At the time, it was about chest high. I could see because the weeds were so high and thick. And I didn't know what I was looking at. And I continued to watch, and this thing started moving to my left. And as it exited the weeds onto the riverbank, I could see that this was about a 7 to 8 foot being with very broad shouldered, the conical head, lots of brown hair. The face features looked very similar to what I described as a Neanderthal. It actually looked more human than it did ape. And this thing stood there looking at me. I guess I was about maybe 30 yards away from it. And it kind of, we kind of locked eyes for about 10 seconds. Then it turned and walked swiftly up into the woods. So, I had heard of Bigfoot, of course, with the Boggy Creek and all the other stuff that had been going on at the time as far as the movie and the legends and stuff. And then we knew somewhat about the Patty film. So I had heard of Bigfoot, but I really didn't think much about it at the time. So, of course, I had this encounter, and I had no idea what I was looking at. So I quickly got out of the river and walked up to my car, got into the car. The dog was actually okay. He had actually made his way across the river over to the other side. I saw him up on the road, so he was all right. Well, anyway, I got in my car, started heading back to Sykesville, which was, like I said, a mile away, so it was about a 3 or 4 minute drive. I found the first phone I could, which was right there on the riverbank. There was a bar there, and I got to the outside payphone and called the local police. They told me, well, just go back to where you were, and somebody will be there to meet you. I said, okay. So I got in the car, headed on back down to the river, and within that 3 to 4 minutes of returning, there was already a Maryland State police officer with a barricade across the road. And when I pulled up, he told me, you got to get out of here. I said, well, look, I just made the call to Sykesville Police. He said, I don't care. He said, you got to leave. You got to get out. And he's the only one there at the time. So I'm kind of wondering what's going on. It seemed really strange that he got there that quick. So, okay, so I went ahead, backed around, and went home. And I was living in Sykesville at the time. So I was home for about maybe an hour, got changed and everything, and decided, well, I'm going back over there and see what's going on. So I did. I drove back over. And when I got there, I mean, there were cars everywhere. In fact, I almost had to park about a quarter mile away and walk up there because it was just so many people. And when I got there and I stopped at the barricade, there was a Howard County police officer standing there. And I went up to him and I asked him, well, what's going on? And he kind of laughingly said, somebody said they saw a Bigfoot. So I didn't tell him I was the one that made the call. So I just stood there for a bit, and look, there were people everywhere. There were people with dogs going in around the river up into the woods. They had a large white tent already set up on the far bank. The feds were there because at that time they used to drive those black Wagoneers. They didn't have RVs and such, but they used to drive those black Wagoneers. There were two of those.
Now, Lon, as somebody who personally hasn't made a Bigfoot report, to me this sounds really bizarre. This level of attention and activity, almost immediately, the minute you put the flare up, this triggered a lot of departments and offices somewhere, right?
Well, what happened, what I found out later, was a woman in Marriottsville, which is like 3 miles away from the location, saw this Bigfoot or another Bigfoot around that morning, a couple hours before I saw mine. And she made the report. But for whatever reason, it started something. It sparked something because, you had the feds and the local police all in together looking for this thing. The only thing that I can figure, and I don't know if this is true or not, but from people I've talked to and other individuals and such, this area in the Baltimore, Washington area, metro area, and people who are familiar with, there are a lot of buildings and facilities that people just don't know what they are. They're there, they're unmarked, and but they're government. And I believe, for whatever reason, that this being may actually have escaped from one of those facilities, or it was something they were looking into. I don't know what exactly happened, but the response by the authorities was quite surprising. I mean, it's more surprising now since we know so much more about the Bigfoot phenomena.
This I've been writing notes here as you're talking, and it certainly suggests that they had some prior knowledge of whatever it was that may have been sighted, and that accounts for the big response. I'm with you, Lon. People might think it's a bit out there, a bit extreme, but when it comes to government facilities, we don't know what they're up to. The Department of Energy, they've been on YouTube talking, in fact, they've been on Netflix talking about how they work in this dimension and other dimensions. So when you add the response to your sighting to the backdrop of that, I think it makes sense, or it definitely makes a strong case for them having prior knowledge, and perhaps, like you say, something that they let out.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I believe happened. I think something got out that wasn't supposed to get out, and they were doing the best they could to track it down and retrieve it as quickly as possible.
And I expect you've worked on hundreds of Bigfoot sightings. I mean, is this kind of response the typical response that you get when a Bigfoot's sighted?
Oh, absolutely not. In fact,
I didn't think so.
This incident was probably one of a kind, as far as I know. I don't doubt it's happened prior or since then, but since I lived it, and the more I think about it, it's just so bizarre. But the area, like I said, that area has a lot of facilities that we just don't know about, and when it comes to the military and to the government and their interest in the Bigfoot and phenomena and other cryptid phenomena for that matter, it's there. I mean, they try to keep it as quiet as possible, but there have been indications over the years that they are definitely involved with it.
Yeah, and I'm speculating wildly, obviously, but one word, a Neanderthal kind of in description. That human-like features, I mean, again, it's a leap and a jump, but military experiments, splicing of DNA, highly, feasible. Definitely could be out there that this was some type of experiment, something like that. Has there ever been, did it come to an abrupt stop, Lon, or has it still been an ongoing thing in that area?
No, there have been sightings reported to the BFRO. I don't even know when the last one was. I have talked to people who have had encounters in that area up to 2 years ago. So, and it's built up quite a bit more than what it used to be too. So that river valley, that Patapsco River Valley, is well known for sightings. So there's, they still have been going on, and there have been some Class A sightings as well. So it's still active.
Did you ever have a follow-up with the police in the area or anything like that? Did any of them say anything to you at all?
Yeah, I had a Sykesville police officer get in contact with me a couple of years later. Well, it was actually around the late 90s, and he had sent me an email telling me that he had, he was there, he was involved, he remembers it. And in fact, this was kind of how the interest in the TV show, the TV episode on Monsters and Mysteries of America, that got involved. So they wanted to know more about it so they could do the show. So I did have confirmation from him, and I also found out from the town manager that the police department has absolutely no record of this. So, it's been a definite cover-up concerning this.
Wow. Now, Lon, if you could quickly let people know the best social media links to follow your work on. Obviously, folks, I expect you to go and visit phantomsandmonsters.com if you haven't already done so. But Lon, over to you. Give people your links.
Well, the phantomsandmonsters.com, that's the link to really go to, because the links to everything else is there. We have Arcane Radio, which I do live on Friday evenings. And as well, we've got the Beyond Explanation YouTube channel.
Check that out, folks. Check that
always
out.
into other stuff.
We'll be back after the break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be... Lon Strickler is my very, very special guest today. And yes, I know I sound like a child on Christmas morning. I love all these topics, and Lon, he can talk about most of the stuff that I just bring up on air, and we'll talk about it for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, we'll move on. But Lon can go so much deeper. And in this segment of the show, we're going to talk about something I have been speaking about a lot in the past couple of years, and that's aliens and alien disclosure. Now, Lon, you've got a book out right now, Alien Disclosure. Tell us a little bit about that, and then let's get into some UFO woo.
Well, Alien Disclosure, Experiences Exposed Reality was a book I wrote about 2.5 years ago, and it basically outlines the cases that I had been involved with over the years. It was actually a book I've been wanting to write for a bit. And I eventually compiled several of the cases I had been involved with. In particular, the David Eckhart abduction and encounters that he and his family experienced for over a decade now. and a few other cases as well. And I also, in the beginning of the book, discuss a bit about my own encounter that I had and my abduction I had back in 2015.
So I asked you before we went on air if it was okay to ask you about this. Some people are comfortable talking about their experiences, some are not, and I respect that entirely. What was your experience then, Don? What happened for you?
Well, after decades of research, investigation, and of course my personal experiences, I believe more so now because of the encounter that the Earth inhabitants and other worldly beings have been, they have been interchanging. There has been encounters for very many millennia. And as a result of several remote viewing sessions and the 3 personal non-terrestrial encounters, and then the one where I had the lost time and the actual abduction, I believe, I was shown a historical scenario by the 3 beings who were part of my abduction. Now, these 3 beings were, they were tall, gray-like beings. There were 3 of them. I had encounters at home with them in the past, but this was the first time that I was taken to another location. And when I was there, I was shown a display, and they also narrated to me, which I could understand what they were saying, though I have no idea if I was actually hearing it or it was being psychically, relayed to me. But what I witnessed was a colossal disc-shaped craft that descended and landed in the area of the present day now River Delta. Now, at that time, the location was completely encircled by the Mediterranean Sea. and that the craft itself was transformed into a massive and magnificent island. From what I was told, this was the genesis of a great empire that encompassed the surrounding indigenous people and land. Now, the rulers of this empire were those occupants of the craft that landed there. Now, I'm talking around the 13th and 12th millennia BCE. Those are the dates that were told to me. So anyway, these rulers of that empire were the occupants of that craft, and their knowledge was disseminated throughout the region, and of course the bloodline was merged with the native people.
Now, Lon, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm listening to you here, and I'll get your thoughts on this. But it sounds similar. It could be something akin to Atlantis.
Well, I did ask them, man. Of course, they communicated to me that this empire was a nexus of several dominant and lesser empires and civilizations. And I did. I literally asked them, was this Atlantis? And I never received a response. I witnessed the representations of various cultures that developed over millennia. Some were brief glimpses of time, while others were mighty empires. So, and that there was a direct connection between the occupants of the craft and the people that were living there. Now, there was a particular emphasis made to the development of the ancient Egyptians. Now, I observed order created out of chaos. It was a civilization that was deeply influenced by the beliefs of these extraterrestrials. And for thousands of years, there were continuous intervention by these alien gods. I was presented a particular series of events that occurred during Egypt's 18th dynasty. And I mean, this really stuck with me. This has been classified as the first dynasty of the New Kingdom of Egypt. This is an era in which the ancient Egypt achieved the peak of its power. Now, the profound encounter occurred during the reign of Amenhotep III. It greatly affected the royal family and the priesthood. The encounter was interpreted by Amenhotep III as a divine message that the pharaoh was a god that rivaled Amun-Ra and the priesthood. So Amenhotep III's display of power and disdain for the priesthood was watched closely by his son Amenhotep III, who later changed his name to Akhenaten. Now, when Akhenaten became pharaoh, he established a quasi-monotheistic belief in the solar deity Aten, which I believe was a representation of either an alien being or an alien craft. It's also my belief that his brother, Prince Tutmos, which I don't know if he was an actual relative or was from another family, but he did live with the family, that Prince Tutmos was earlier banished to the eastern desert for unknown reasons. I have no idea why that would have happened. This is what was suggested to me. This Prince Tutmos later returned to Egypt during, I believe, the early 19th dynasty as the Hebrew prophet Moses. So, what I observed over the years eventually altered my perception of human history as we know it, that our past was intertwined with these extraterrestrial beings, and that modern humans, I believe, are a genetic extension of otherworldly species. And I think it continues to this day.
Just listening to you, Lon, where to start? Brilliant, brother. But I agree with you. I think we're an amalgamation of a variety of species that come from here, there, everywhere. I think the fact that our eyes aren't successfully adapted to the sunlight from our local star. It's said to be our local star, but our eyes aren't adapting to look at it. Our skin, we get sunburnt. You know, we're not really, when you think about it, we're not perfectly designed for our environment. So I've also heard on occasion people mentioning that whole Moses aspect that you talked about there. And I'm just kind of blown away by your, and I don't want to call this an abduction because abduction kind of has negative connotations. I mean, did you feel like you were being taken against your will, Lon? How did
No,
that kind of part of it
no.
go?
You know, I don't know if I was physically taken or that my consciousness was moved to another location or moved into another level. It did seem like I was at another location. That's something I had never experienced before. That is the first time and the last time I have felt that. That occurred in December 2015. It was an interesting year. 2015 was the year my wife became ill with cancer, and we were going through a lot. And I had these encounters with these alien beings in my home during that period of time. And I was also being shown in reference for me to owls. I was seeing owls. I was getting references to owls. It was interesting. I told my colleague Butch Witkowski at the time what was going on, that I was getting all these references to owls. And in fact, I eventually saw a few that actually showed up near the time when my wife passed away. So, you know, that year was very strange. Now, why all that was occurring, you know, some people have told me, well, you know, you're under stress and, you know, this was happening in your mind and all. Well, that just isn't the truth. I have been involved with several people that have been abducted, have had encounters over many years. And I just know that what I experienced actually happened.
You know,
But
Lon,
for whatever reason.
talk about weird and strange, brother. Oh, well, synchronicity. It strikes again. It always happens on the show. Something weird threads into something that's happened. And one of my good friends, somebody that came on Freaky Friday and blew all our minds recently, is Jason Merritt, aka First Paranormal, over on YouTube. And he might actually be a potential guest for your radio show, Lon. He goes out and does paranormal investigations. He goes on these kind of urban exploration, underground type adventures. I worry about him, I really do. But before the show or during the show, he had said to me, and it seemed random at the time, but not so much now, that he said, ask Lon if he knows anything about the Owl Man. And now here you are talking about owls. Now, I know it's probably not directly related to your UFO experience, but have you ever looked into anything called the Owl Man?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Owl Man, that was actually investigated, the Owl Man sightings in the Cornwall years ago by Jonathan Downs. He actually wrote a book about it. And some of these earlier sightings of the Chicago Mothman or Lake Michigan Mothman, some of the early descriptions were that of a large humanoid-like owl.
So,
you know, and I have heard other descriptions. We had one in Pennsylvania as well. So you know, we have had those sightings over the years.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to that, Jason. I really will. And you're right, Jason. This guest is on fire. He's amazing. What did you end up attributing the kind of owl symbology that was surrounding you at the time? And you also mentioned, Lon, that something that changed your mindset on the whole alien thing was remote viewing. I am fascinated with remote viewing. I think it's amazing. I can't quieten my mind for a minute to meditate, let alone remote view. But talk to us about your remote viewing and the UFOs, aliens.
Well, the remote viewing, actually, I was able to connect with an individual who lived in Wales. who actually worked for MI6 at one period of time, and she retired. And her and I became friends, and she eventually taught me to remote view. She was a monitor, and for almost 6 months we trained daily over Skype. I know it's very weird to hear that, but we did, and eventually we used it to work cases throughout the UK and the United States. We had several cases over a period of time, and we solved several cases using remote view. And it's just, remote viewing is just another tool in the arsenal when trying to determine what is going on during a haunting. And it became very useful, as well as useful for when we moved on these energies to another level. And I still use it occasionally. I kind of backed off of it after a while because I was literally experiencing psychic attacks, and in fact, I had one attack where I received a large laceration from my sternum down to my belly button across my chest, and because of a psychic attack, as well as I've had some bruised ribs as a result as well.
So Lon, just listening,
it's not, it's something you got to be aware of, but these psychic attacks do come about.
Oh, the psychic attack thing, absolutely, brother. And is this because the being, the entity in question, does it sense that you're there watching it, viewing it? Is that basically what happens?
Occasionally, they will sense that you're there, and that's when things can go a little haywire. When I would do these remote views, this other person was the monitor, and it was their duty to pull me out if things got a bit hairy. And that had happened. That happened on 2 occasions. One was a remote view and haunting that we were working in Prince Edward Island, and another one occurred in Neath, Wales. So, yeah, it does happen. It really does.
Wow, man. So, back to the whole UFO thing. You mentioned another person you'd worked with there, somebody you documented their case. Was it Eckhart? Was that
Yeah, David Eckhart.
Can you tell us about that one, Lon?
Well, David and his family lived in a place called Milton, Florida, which is just outside of Pensacola. And for a couple of years prior to contacting me, well, I actually contacted him, but he was attempting to get MUFON to come out to his place and investigate some of the strange phenomena that was going on in his home. And what was going on was, at first they thought they had paranormal activity with spirits and spirit energy, but what it turned out, they would be sleeping at night and they started hearing sounds like something was in their bedroom. He eventually was able to capture a small entity on camera, and one day they noticed that the far wall in their bedroom would literally open up like a portal where he could see down into it. And when that began, he started experiencing abductions. And before the abduction started, now David at the time was suffering from very debilitating rheumatoid arthritis. I had seen the X-rays and the medical records of this, and but he told me what happened was that he was chosen for some reason to be shown a lot of this stuff. This is something he never still understands, but they came in and over a series of 4 nights, they literally performed surgery on him and cured him of the arthritis. It was an absolute miracle. So they started taking him and his wife and children to other locations. He wasn't, he didn't want this to happen, but it just continued to happen. And it was happening sometimes twice a week. And it continued for almost, I guess the abductions actually continued on a steady basis for almost 5 years. So he was kind of desperate as to getting help into investigating this. So I contacted him after seeing a video of this being that he captured, and I sent an email to him, and then got a response, and he was telling me how MUFON wasn't responding to him, nobody was interested in what was going on with him. So I began to start working with him, and we were literally on the phone 2 to 3 hours a day for, oh my God, I guess almost 6 months or more. And he was sending me evidence and stuff. He had videotaped screenshots of certain activity, some very interesting videos of entities that were showing up in the bedroom. It was just an overwhelming amount of evidence, and he still receives it. David and I talk a lot, and I have interviewed David several times. So if you do want to listen to his interviews, if you go to the Beyond Explanation YouTube channel, we do have the archive set up there. But David will be coming on my show in about a month again, and we'll be picking up where we left off, because he has had some new activity going on there.
Why do you think some people are chosen over others? Do you think it's entirely random, or is there any commonality that you've come across when it comes to abductees, Lon?
I don't think it's random. People that experience abductions, for the most part, have had this going on with other relatives before them, and even their children and those beyond. It seems to be a generational thing, and most of these abductees have several types of abductions, and there's no real rhyme or reason for it. There have been a lot of theories about, most abductees have Rh negative blood, which is found in only 15% of the world population. I don't know if that's a fact or not. It does seem that most of the people I have dealt with and have seen evidence of abduction do have this Rh negative factor in their blood. But I don't know. I mean, I personally believe that a lot of these people who are abducted and they either receive an implant or use for some type of breeding or whatever they use it, are like projects to these beings. And they want to keep a steady look at what's going on in their lives and into their relatives. And I think that's why it continues with the bloodline. There's a specific reason why, I believe. And now in David's case, he believes he has been bred. He has seen what he believes was a hybrid child at one point. Beyond that,
were you given any information when you were showing what you were showing about this hybrid program? I've done episodes on this before. You were told nothing, no?
I was just shown what I remember. Yeah. And that's it. I mean, and why I was shown that myself, I really don't know. I have no idea why that was presented to me, but it was, and but that was to what I mean, I remember the extent of what I saw.
I would like to think that they were fully aware of who Lon Strickler would become, and perhaps the images you were showing, the story that you were showing, is a story I would like to think that needs to be told, Lon. And you keep on telling
Possibly.
it, brother. You keep on telling it, and obviously wild speculation here. But what do you sometimes think the hybrid program might be about?
Oh, I don't know. There's got to be a factor behind it. Why they do it. There's no explanation to it. There have been a lot of theories and conjecture about, well, they're part of a race that has lost their civilization, is kind of diminishing and such. I actually believe that most of these alien beings, in particular the Greys, the different types of Greys, and I think they are evolved human beings, quite frankly, that have come back through some type of time travel or through portals to either change the history that happened previous, or to, and as far as the breeding, to maybe strengthen their bloodlines, or to maybe find a connection between them and their ancestors. So
There's something about that. I resonate with that as well. Anytime I hear stories of the Greys, it's not a stretch of the imagination to see how we could, over time, millennia, evolve into something very similar to that. We're already technology hungry, folks. Is it really a surprise if our eyes all of a sudden start to get bigger? Our sun starts to change, maybe our eyes will adapt again. We've got genetic modification that we're playing about with in laboratories. Stuff we know about, stuff we don't know about. Hey, anything's possible. We'll be back after the break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Hour number 2 on today's Kev Baker Show, and what a show this has been so far. We have got the brilliant Lon Strickler here with us. Check out phantomsandmonsters.com for all of your cryptid kind of research needs, up-to-date sightings. It is full of the woo. Remember to check out the YouTube channel called Beyond Explanation. It's Beyond Explanation, and you will find all of Lon's work on there. And Lon, you were telling me that you really work as part of something called the Fortean Research Team, is that correct?
yeah, it's the Phantoms and Monsters 14 research team. We have a team of about 20 investigators, as well as we have several affiliates in the U.S. and also in the U.K. That website is new. It's cryptidhunters.org. You can go over there and see who's on the team, and we are continuously loading up our investigations, our reviews and reports of our investigations on that site as well.
Yeah, this is looking amazing, folks. Check that out, cryptidhunters.org. Now then, let us move to another area that you have researched, and that is Mothman winged type entities, winged humanoids, call them what you may. You mentioned to us that you and a number of other people actually had your own experience. I'll get you to talk about that, and then I'd love for us to get into not the Point Pleasant Mothman. We had Travis Short on just recently, but I'd love to hear more about the Illinois flap. I covered it at the start, and then I thought it had gone away, but it was only recently listening to you that I found out that this hasn't gone away at all. So, winged humanoids, Lon, You've had an experience. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, in the fall of 1988, I actually had come across the person I had been in school with, was in Boy Scouts with, down in Baltimore. And when we sat down and had lunch that day, we were talking about a lot of stuff we'd done when we were younger. And he was aware of my abilities and some of the paranormal work I had done. In fact, when we were kids, we used to camp out on the battlefield at night. And he and I experienced a few things together. So he was quite aware of some of the things I was involved with. When we were sitting there talking, he was telling me about some incidents that had occurred at a location called Camp Conawago, which is here, very near Gettysburg, here in south central Pennsylvania. It's a Boy Scout camp that's been around for really almost a century. And the occurrences were that some of these troops were packing up and leaving the campsites because they were hearing these god-awful screams at night. They couldn't figure out what it was. They described it as a child screaming or some type of entity. They didn't understand what it was, but they were scared, so they left. So my friend then told me that he and another scout master were going to Camp Conawago the next weekend. And, out of a whim, he asked me, he said, well, look, do you want to go along? You want to meet us up there? And I said, sure, I'd go ahead and check it out. So that's what we did. This was, like I said, this was 1988. This is a time when I could actually camp out and not be so stiff I couldn't walk the next morning. Those days are over. So anyway.
Same here, Lon. Same here.
Yeah. So we met up at the Camp Conawaga, and we trekked into the woods, into one of the camping areas. And this is right alongside the main branch of the Conawago Creek, very near where it intersects with the little Conawago. So we set up. It was about by the time we got everything set up, I guess it was about 6 in the evening. It was a Friday. And we had 3 tents set up. We had the fire going, and what we did basically that first night was just sit around and talk, about anything that came up. I did have a strange feeling that something was watching us. Now, I didn't really say anything. I just had that sense. These woods are fairly thick woods. There's a lot of wildlife in there. So I didn't say much. So that first night was uneventful. So that night we slept, no big deal. Woke up the next morning, sat around to have breakfast, and the other guy mentioned that he thought he had heard footsteps or something walking in through the camp. I had heard it as well, but I thought it was just one of those guys getting up to relieve themselves. I even didn't know what it was. But nothing in the campsite was disturbed, so we didn't think much of it. So we spent that Saturday, in the woods hiking, and we were gone a good while, 6-7 hours maybe. We met back at the campsite. We didn't really see anything out of the ordinary. We got to the campsite, sat down. It was starting to get early evening and dusk, and we sat around the campfire and we were just talking. So we were there for a while. Nothing's going on. I'm starting to wonder if anything, is actually going to happen. So about 11 o'clock, we heard this scream. Now, it seemed like it was a distance. I couldn't tell what it was. It was shrill. But, it could have been an animal, could have been a bobcat, maybe an owl or something. So we didn't really think much about it. It didn't seem menacing or anything. So we had that one scream. So not long after that, though, there was another scream. Now, this time, it sounded like a child screaming, and it was fairly loud. So whatever it was getting closer. So we all commented that it did sound like a child screaming. So we were kind of alert. So we decided to stay up the rest of the night. So we sat around talking about that and a few other things. So I'd say about maybe 1 o'clock in the morning, I was up stretching my legs. So I walked out to the trail and right beside the creek. And I was just, again, I had this weird feeling, like something was watching us. So I walked back to the guys and I told them, said, look, why don't we go out on the trail and just walk up and down a bit to see if we, see anything. We weren't doing anything else. So they decided, yeah, that's all good. So we all grabbed our flashlights. We went out onto the trail, and we were not more than 50 foot off the entrance on the trail from the campsite when we all three saw these red eyes in the creek. And this thing, the creek itself was very shallow at that time of year, and the moonlight there was enough moonlight that we could tell it was a dark figure there, but they definitely had these red eyes. And by the time we got our flashlights on this thing suddenly propelled itself out of the water into the air. It made a whooshing sound, and as it got to the apex in the air, we couldn't see it, but we heard it. It was screaming, and it was flying away. It was kind of fading out. We got our butts back to the campsite. My buddy, he was freaking out. I mean, he didn't know what this was. And of course, we didn't know what it was, but he was really upset by it. So the other guy mentioned me, did you see anything on its back? And I did notice some type of structure or whatever on its back. And I just assumed it may have been wings. I didn't know. But we never saw any wings unfurled while it was in the creek or when it took off. So I don't know exactly.
This kind of just shot up kind of thing?
Yeah.
Wow.
And, that's very similar to what's going on in Chicago. I mean, this thing, it seems to have the ability to propel itself without use of the wings. There's some type of supernatural aspect to it that causes that. So anyway, after a while, we finally got our buddy to talk, and he said, well, I'm leaving. I'm going up to the administration building to sleep up there tonight. So they both took off. So I stayed back because I wanted to see this thing. I wanted to get a better look at it. And but nothing happened. So that I kind of kept that to myself for almost 20 years. I didn't really mention it to a lot of people, and it was kind of stuck in the back of my mind. I was looking into other cryptid activity and other things all over the place, but I had, during that 20 years, I hadn't heard any more about it. So, of course, I started the blog in 2005. Around 2008, I actually wrote about this, and I put it in the blog, and I immediately started getting a response. There was a gentleman who lived maybe a mile upstream at Dick's Dam, who told me in an email that he had been hearing his screaming sounds for years. And he had no idea what it was. He'd never seen anything. He would just suddenly hear this child screaming or a woman screaming. And he just had it happened year round too. He didn't know what it was. So maybe not long after I got that email, I got another email from a scoutmaster who told me his troop had been at Camp Conewaga a couple weeks prior to that. And one Saturday afternoon, they were set up camping, and some of the boys of the troop walked up the same trail and then came running back telling him that they saw what they said was a dragon. And he thought they were playing games with him. He said they seemed very serious, but he said, I just couldn't believe what they were telling me. So maybe they saw a deer or something. He didn't know. So, but after he read what I had written, then he started warning, well, maybe this guy did see something. So The interesting thing about this was after I started writing about this, I received 5 more reports of very similar sighting along the Conewago Creek. Now, the Conewago Creek extends from Camp Conewago, kind of goes west for for a little bit, then turns east again, and for about 15 miles it extends across York County and then empties into the Susquehanna River. Well, I've been receiving reports of these winged beings along the creek in various locations, and I think the last one I received was in it was about 3 or 4 years ago. Now, this part of the country here in south central Pennsylvania, there have been winged humanoid sightings all throughout this county, Adams and York County, but the whole general area has had these reports over time. So, I don't know why they're here, what the reason is, but people are seeing it.
Lon, that in that area, is there government facilities the same as around Baltimore?
No.
No,
The closest thing is Raven Rock, which is what people consider the underground Pentagon. That is, well, my location. I'm near Gettysburg. That's about 15 miles southwest of Gettysburg. But that's the only government facility in this area.
Interesting. Now then, if I can, let's come up towards present day and the alleged Mothman or winged humanoid that seems to be blighting the residents of Illinois and in particular around Chicago. What is going on, Lon?
Well, I wish I knew what was going on. This all began for us. Well, initially, there were 3 sightings in 2011 in South Chicago. This was in the summertime. Yeah, it was a sighting in August and September and then October. There was also a photograph of some flying being taken as well along Pulaski Avenue in South Chicago. It's kind of hard to kind of figure out what this thing was because of the distance and how big it was. I don't think what was seen was very big, not as what people are describing now. But anyway, we had those 3 sightings, and there was some stirring about it at the time. But there wasn't a whole lot about it going on. There was actually the reports actually came into MUFON, and we weren't able to actually talk to them because of that. All we could use was the information that was provided in their report. So up until early 2017, there had been reports, but they weren't really coming to light until after this started in 2017. So we received, MUFON received a couple reports again from people who started seeing this red-eyed winged being. And the first one that was reported was in an area called Oz Park, which is located in, I guess that's North Chicago. And this woman who was a lawyer was taking her dog out for a walk one evening, and she would cut across into Oz Park. And, so he could do his business. But they came across this tall, dark being that was standing on one of the patio areas, and it had these huge wings that actually extended above the head of this thing. It stood about 6 to 7 foot, and the dog didn't react other than to try to hide behind her. And this was Jack Russell too, so they're kind of aggressive dogs. So as they stood there and watched this thing, it turned and that's when the red eyes were seen. And it actually jettisoned itself up into the air. Didn't extend its wings either. It quickly jettisoned into the air and then screamed as it got it up into the air and, kind of faded away. We were fortunate enough to be able to track her down, even though it came from a MUFON report. And my associate Manuel Navarrete actually interviewed her. So subsequent reports were coming in through MUFON, and there were two reports that the description was like that of an owl man, a large owl with red eyes. This was also in North Chicago. Humboldt Park was one area. The other was at a food distributor where a lot of these guys were working at night making deliveries. This thing showed up there. They were actually throwing rocks at it or stones at it, apparently, to try to get this thing to react to them, but it just took off. Well, anyway, by this time, I started soliciting reports, and I started putting these solicitations out onto Google, onto the website, everywhere I could, and we started getting reports. Now, even though we were soliciting these reports, people were having these sightings, and what they would do is Google what they saw, and we would come up and they'd report to us immediately. We got a lot of reports right after this happened, and these folks, this is one of the more surprising things about about these reports was that these witnesses never deviated away from what they originally told us. They did not embellish on the reports. They saw it. It seemed to leave an imprint on them, and they told us what they saw. Many were deeply affected by it, had this feeling of dread. It affected them. And, this was coming from all areas of the city. There were some areas where there were more reports along the waterfront. There were many. They were Lincoln Park area, then eventually into the little village area. Some parts of South Chicago. Then they started extending out. We were getting reports then in northwest Indiana, further west into the suburbs, and further north into the suburbs of Chicago, up into South Wisconsin. So, this has continued on for all these years, and it still continues on. And since October of 2019, the majority of the reports have been coming from in and around O'Hare International. Now, why that is, I don't know, but I do believe there may possibly be some alien or extraterrestrial connection with these beings, because there have been UFO sightings. There have been other gray-like beings associated with these beings, these winged beings. So, and we've also received reports of unknown humanoids in these forest preserve areas around that location. So, it's something we're continuing to investigate, and the sightings aren't coming in as they used to. I mean, we're not getting like 2-3 a week, but there's still steady sightings, and we're also getting reports from employees at the airport, TSA employees, as well as airline pilots. So we're getting a good mix of witnesses, very sincere, very professional witnesses, and this is something that's definitely going on. And at this point right now, we have received just a little over 100 reports that we believe are credible.
Wow. You see, I had been talking about this when it kind of appeared in the media, and people were talking about it 2017. But like I said to you on Bill's show, I thought this had kind of died away. Obviously not.
Mm.
These winged humanoids, Lon, are they something that's been with us throughout time as well?
You know, the winged humanoid phenomena has cropped up once in a while over history. Uh, you know, of course, they talk about the Anunnaki as supposed to have been some type of winged being, or other deities that were supposed to be winged beings. These entities that people maybe describe as angels may have been something other than that. So yeah, this winged humanoid, winged being phenomena has been going on for millennia.
Wow. And of course, our friend Jason, he had brought up the Owl Man. He's talked about the Owl Man of Cornwall on the show. Would you say that's different terminology for much and such the same thing, Lon?
Possibly. I mean, we have had sightings of these winged beings that had wings that looked like that of an owl with feathers and such. We've had those reports over here as well. So yeah, I'm not saying, I'm not going to pigeonhole these things all in one category.
Yeah.
There do seem to be different varieties of these winged humanoids.
And we're almost on a break here, but when we come back, I've been saving the best for last. Guilty pleasure. The audience love all this as well, but we're going to get into the Dogmen and werewolf type activity. So stay tuned for that, folks. And of course, coming up right after today's show, we've got Quantum Connections with Lucky. So please, please, please stay tuned for that. Now, Lon, I noticed you had tried your hand at a live stream, a question and answer session. Are you going to be doing that on a regular basis so that the audience can keep up with your work, brother?
Yeah, we're going to try to. We have one scheduled for next Wednesday, the 23rd, at a 9:00 p.m. Eastern time, where I'm going to be answering questions live in a chat.
I'll be there, man. My body clock is on East Coast time. That is perfect for me. That's perfect winding down bed material. No, folks, please check out Lon's channel. I'll bring it up here. I'm going to drop the link over in the TFR chat room for you all to head on over during the break, hit subscribe, and I think it's a no-brainer. If you like my show, if you like TFR, if you like the woo, then you're going to absolutely love everything that Lon is up to over there. Check out phantomsandmonsters.com as well. And of course, when we come back after the break, hold on tight, buckle up, because we are going full woo. We're going to be talking about werewolf sightings, Dogman, and just about anything else that I can cram in to the next 25 minutes. And of course, I'll be back tomorrow right here, same time, same place, with Scotty Lopez. So we'll be back after these short messages. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Big shout out to Luna and Donnie down under. Yes, myself and Lon during the break, we were talking about the little people. Remember the things we were talking about on Freaky Friday? And then we were looking at the Aboriginal people and the photographs of the little hairy people, the baby yowies. Remember that? Yeah, yeah. Well, Lon himself, I was asking him during the break, and it's not something he regularly gets reported to him, but he has had reports of little people, and again, like Jason's information, very intertwined with Native American legend and lore. So with that out of the way, this is a bit I've been looking forward to, Lon. And firstly, can I thank you for your time today? You've been an absolute star. You've been everything I thought you would be, Lon.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
No, I love all this, man. And I thank you for your time. Thank you for the work you do. People like me, we would have nowhere to go if it wasn't for the time that you put into the website. And how much time does it take to run something like phantomsandmonsters.com?
I probably dedicate maybe 4 to 6 hours a day, maybe.
That's full-time work then, brother.
That's just for the blog itself. I mean, everything else with the team, and if I decide to write a book or getting ready for the radio show and this and that, it takes up my day.
There you go. Now, Lon, I've just sent you an image there, and that's the photograph from Australia that we were talking about on previous shows. And what I'd love for us to get into now, though, because I was listening to you talking about a case or a series of cases that you were working on in and around 2013. Pennsylvania, again, I believe. I've got written down here Blair County, Misha State Park, and I've got written above it all is werewolves. Now, I love hearing all this dogmen, werewolf type stories. Take us back to 2013 then, Lon, and what was going on?
Actually, this stuff started in 2014. We had later gotten some reports from 2013, but I'd say the thing that got us started into this investigation was Friday, November 7th, Butch Witkowski, UFO Research Center, Pennsylvania, got a hold of me about a report he received. And the witness stated that he was in the north edge of the state game land 331, which is in Clearfield County, just south of Penfield, between 10 and 11 a.m. on November 7, 2014. He was out walking his 2 dogs, and when suddenly an unknown bipedal creature stepped out of the brush. Now, his description was it was 8 to 10 foot in height, weight unknown, large strides, short hair, dark colored, most likely brown, but very dark. And he thought it may have been a Bigfoot, but it had a prominent snout. Now, the witness said that it took all his strength to hold on to his dogs. They freaked. And, but the creature never reacted to the dogs barking and stared straight ahead and continued to quickly walk away into the forest. Now, he said the witness and others returned to the location the next day, that Saturday. They found the exact area where the dogs had dug into the ground attempting to chase this creature. But when they got there, the whole group got this very uneasy feeling and quickly left. Now, this was kind of the initial encounter that was reported to us, and it kind of went on from there. We got another report subsequently about a year later in mid-August of 2015. And because this report was very near the area where this other report was, it was, it called our attention. But actually, the gentleman wrote me at first. And the first thing he had on the top of this email was, I saw a werewolf.
So catch your attention.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and read what he sent to me. He said, I live in a small town called Penfield, Clearfield County. This encounter happened in late July of this year, 2015. I was driving home from work on Boy Scout Road in Penfield. I usually stick to the main roads when driving home, but sometimes take back roads to take in the scenery. As I was coming around the bend, I saw a large brownish tan creature crouching on the side of the road. I slowed down to get a better look. That's when it turned its head towards my vehicle. It had a large head and yellowish glow to its eyes and a long nose. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. It was eating roadkill, I believe a deer. At this point, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and didn't let off the gas until I reached my home. He said he jumped out of the car, got in his house, locked all the doors, grabbed the rifle, and went out to the basement. He was freaking. And he said he hadn't seen anything since then, but he wanted to tell me about an incident that he had about a month prior to that, and when he was at a local mini mart getting gas. He said a game commission officer pulled up to the next pump. Attached to his truck was a trailer, and in that trailer was an elk. You know, it was a dead elk. He said a lot of elks have radio collars, and when one dies, the game commission's job is to figure out how it died and take samples and such. So I asked the game commission officer what had happened to it. It was a young elk, maybe 2 to 3 years at most. It looked fine to me, except for the fact that his throat was slit. He told me he had no clue, and that, you know, that when they found it, the collar had been wearing was about 10 foot away. He said at first they thought it was a bear, as the only animal around here large enough to take down a bull elk, but there was no evidence indicating it was a bear. Plus, he told me the cut on the throat was too clean. He said after that conversation, I didn't think too much about it until I saw this thing I did that night. So, you know, based on this person, you know, he said he doesn't have any supernatural beliefs or anything, but he has no idea what this was. So, of course, I contacted this witness right away, and he couldn't add any more details to it, but you know, he wanted to know what this bipedal creature was that was crouched down eating the roadkill. So eventually that Boy Scout camp, and which was along that road, Butch and several other investigators went up there, but they didn't, you know, they couldn't find any evidence of any type of upright canine or dogman. But the fact that something slipped the collar and the throat of this elk, you know, it perplexed the Pennsylvania game commission officer. And I will say, since we have begun this investigation, now these government types will not acknowledge this type of activity officially, but we are personally working with several of these officers to try to determine what these beings are, what this phenomenon is, because we did have one encounter that took place about 2 years ago in Rothrock State Park, which is in Center County, Pennsylvania, where there were 3 couples at the park, nice sunny day. They were, one of them worked for the game commission, and they were walking along a new trail that was just built in the park. And as they were walking, one of the women of the group happened to look back and saw this upright canine stepping out of the weeds. And she screamed, and they all looked, and this thing was standing there. It wasn't, you know, it didn't back away. In fact, it took a couple steps forward. Apparently, I don't know what the distance was. I think Butch told me 50 foot or more, but it backed off and went back into the weeds. So, of course, this guy being game commission officer, he had never seen anything like this before. So they were making their way back to the parking lot, in which they were heading in that direction. When they got to the parking lot, this creature was standing there. It was observing them. It was watching them. The only thing I can think is that this area was territorial to this upright canine. Now, it didn't attack anybody. It stood its ground. It watched them as they got into the car and took off, but did not back off. Now, I don't know what the hell they saw, but this is the kind of stuff we're getting out of central Pennsylvania, and it's. I think at this point now we've had, oh my, I don't know how many reports. It's in the mid 20s, credible reports that we have received. But there are a lot of historical reports of these upright canines, werewolves, something people call the Dueo. It extends down into Maryland as well. This is a phenomena that has been going on in this area for about 150 years.
So you mentioned and I don't want you to say anything you can't say, obviously, but you are involved, or there are some elements of law enforcement, call it that, whatever, are involved. What kind of ideas are being bandied about as to what might be the kind of source of this?
They don't know.
No idea.
That's why they contacted us.
Wow.
Seriously. I mean, we didn't contact them. They contacted us. We do have one officer in that region that is working very closely with Butch. He has been in contact with both of us. And they know something's going on. They know something is out there. But officially, they can't say anything. That's just the way it is.
Now, before we came on air today, I done a pre-show stream, and I done a kind of snap poll. There was about 60 of us in watching that. And I asked people, what do you think could be behind this? And one of the choices, demonic. The other one was a lost species, something we don't know about. The lost species, some kind of dog / species of something that we haven't discovered yet. It was the most common pick for people. What do you think, if you were to be pushed on it, Lon? What do you think?
Well, if these were a relic species or indigenous species, we'd be hearing much more about them. There'd be much more evidence, just like with Bigfoot. I think most cryptids in particular, and I'm not particular, most cryptids in general have supernatural aspects to them. In other words, they can either move in and out of realities, or they can cloak themselves to some degree. There has been this phenomena that's been going on for years now, what people call the Glimmer Man, or some type of entity that just think of the Predator movies, something to that effect. I still think the guy who wrote the Predator movies had some encounter with something like that at some point before the movie. That type of glimmering outline or form, I believe, is some type of cloaked being. Possibly a Bigfoot, possibly an upright canine, possibly something else. But I think it's a cloaking device. And look, these reports have come in from all over North America. We have received these for years, so who knows?
Now, is this the only time that you've had, I don't want to call it Men in Black contacting you about a case, but okay, I called them that. John Keel. John Keel's somebody, I love getting into the Mothman mystery, stuff like that. The Men in Black, what do you make of them, Lon? And have you been approached on other occasions by them? Or have you had any dealings with them?
I have never dealt with the Men in Black per se. I've dealt with government types before, but not what people would call the Men in Black. The Men in Black, I think that's an extension of the extraterrestrial phenomena.
They're like a cryptid of their own, aren't they?
Yeah, when I started writing the Alien Disclosure book and started getting into some of the weird ufology and some of the stuff associated with the phenomena, I could talk about black-eyed kids and other stuff like that. But I really do believe that the Men in Black is something connected with non-terrestrial beings, non-human beings, possibly hybrids of some type. They seem to know things before somebody has reported a sighting. I've had several instances where people would have a UFO sighting or some type of sighting of an alien-like being, and these guys would show up before they even had a chance to report it. And they're always seemingly trying to get the person not to say anything. Threats, yeah, I'd say they're threats. I mean, the people feel threatened by it. So, you know, how they do that, they have some abilities of some type to be able to come into a scene before anybody reports it.
Yeah, the Men in Black. I don't know if you've ever watched the TV show Fringe. Yeah, I think J.J. Abrams. Funny you kind of say that you think whoever done the Predator probably had an encounter. I think J.J. Abrams based his Observers. Was it August, the baldy guy with the hat? I think that was based on John Keel's Men in Black, because they were.
I think it was too.
Yeah, definitely. They were out of time. They were out of place. They were, and like you say, almost this there to document it, but at the same time to kind of shut people up as well, right?
Yeah.
Very, very weird.
Yeah, it's a weird phenomenon. Now, you know, we talked about Nick Redfern off the air. And I mean, he's been investigating this for a long time now. I think he believes it's something other than human.
Yeah, and I think you're going to have Nick on your show soon, aren't you?
Yeah, Nick's going to be on with me in a couple of weeks.
Yep, and he's going to be coming and gracing KBS again a few weeks' time as well, so I look forward to that. So, as somebody that investigates cases, Lon, how's the right way to word this? And what's the weirdest one, or what's the kind of strangest case that you've really investigated, where you've had a bit of a, maybe even gave you a bit of a kind of strange feeling, you know, kind of worried you? Anything like that?
Well, I think I can talk about the one that affected me more than anything else. This happened in July 2009, where I received a call from a woman by the name of Mandy. Said she was in a living hell. You know, her and her mother lived in a farmhouse outside a small town in east central Washington, which is actually about a mile from the Idaho border. And about 2 weeks prior to contacting me, her and her mother had been noticing these red and white lights hovering above the Coeur d'Alene Mountains, which is east of them. And as they watched, Mandy started getting dizzy, feeling weird about it. And that one night she had a horrific nightmare consisting of the flashing lights and mechanical sounds. And she actually woke up the next day not feeling well. She's a school teacher, and she had to stay at home. So a couple nights later, her and her mother were in the kitchen, and they started hearing these popping sounds. Now, it was nighttime, and they were coming from the backyard, and they looked out the window, and they noticed hundreds of these small red and white orbs or lights flying around. Each time one of them would collide and make a popping sound. She ran into the living room to look out the front window, and these lights were everywhere, even across the road into the field. Her mother picked up the phone to call the police, and there was no dial tone. All the lights started to flicker, and there were strange sounds coming from the roof, scratching sounds. But then after about 5 minutes, it just suddenly stopped, you know, all back to normal. Mandy went outside. She said that she noticed a motor oil smell, but that's all she noticed that was different. So the next night, about 10:30, Mandy was getting ready for bed, and when she was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, she noticed two loud thuds on the roof. She went to her mother's room to see if she had heard the sounds, but she was already in bed asleep. And while walking through the hallway to her room, she heard several more thuds on the roof, and then scampering sounds up in the attic. She looked out the bedroom window. Once again, these red and white lights were flying all about, and The sounds in the attic actually eventually woke her mother up. And then suddenly all the electric went out of the house. And they actually sat in her room for a couple hours with lighted candles, listening to all this racket up on the roof and in the attic. They didn't know what was going on. So eventually, a few days later, Mandy contacted me by telephone. She was referred to me from a paranormal investigator in Spokane, and we began talking. And actually, I was sensing this just wasn't your run-of-the-mill unexplained encounter. There was something behind this. I didn't mention it to her, but I listened to the story. I listened to everything that was going on. We were actually on the phone for about 3 hours, and so after I got off the phone with Mandy and her mother, I started to examine several other cases in my database. I couldn't really find anything similar to that, but I just had a bad feeling about this. So the next day, I expected to receive a follow-up telephone call from Mandy. And in fact, I called and left several messages, and I waited for 3 days, never received a phone call until that next Sunday afternoon. I received a call, and it was Mandy's mother, and she apologized for not getting back to me. There was obvious distress in her voice, and after a brief pause, she called me and said, "Mandy is missing." And of course, I get this sick feeling in my stomach. She told me that Mandy had gone to bed not long after we had talked on the telephone. Her mother remained downstairs in the living room watching television, and about 11 p.m., she decided to go into her bedroom. She passed Mandy's bedroom. She noticed a light coming from the bottom of the door. She knocked on the door in order to check on her, and there was no response. And as she opened the door, the room went completely dark. She flicked on the light switch by the door and observed that Mandy wasn't in bed. She called out to her, but there was no response. She panicked, began literally screaming for her, running throughout the house with just no trace of her inside and out. She was gone, and the local authorities had no explanation. All Mandy's personal items, including her car, remained. She had just simply vanished, and since Mandy was an adult, there wasn't really much the police could do about it. They suspected, of course, what they suspected, she took off with somebody, or. So I asked her mother to keep me updated. No, I never really expected to hear back from her again. And as far as, up to this date, I have checked with Washington State Police, and she's never returned home. And there's, she's just like she vanished off the face of the earth. That was the one case that's really stuck with me. I do believe she was abducted, and she just never returned home.
Wow. What can you say to that, Lon? Wow. I mean, you hear about missing 411 cases, stuff like that, but that's next level, and no wonder, that's kind of stayed with you,
Yeah, I mean, not that I really could have done anything.
No, but still,
yeah,
real. I mean, this is real stuff, folks. We talk about the woo sometimes. We get into the X-Files, and then you hear a story like this where it really has real world ramifications. Somebody just not being here anymore. Lon, I have had an absolute blast today, sir. I can't thank you enough for this. I can't thank you enough for coming on with myself and Bill and Travis. You are an absolute legend in my book, Lon, and I would love to have you back in the future, sir.
No problem. Just let me know.
Awesome. And folks, please, please, please take the time. Go and check out phantomsandmonsters.com. You'll get lost in there. I often do. You can also go to the YouTube channel, and like Lon was saying, he'll be doing a question and answer and various types of live stream content over on the Beyond Explanation YouTube channel. He's also got a new website as well. That is called cryptidhunters.org. Check out all of these places. You can follow Lon over on Facebook as well. And remember, stay tuned, because after the break, Quantum Connections will be on the way. I'll be back with a pre-show live stream tomorrow, and then I'll be live right here on your #1 network, Truth Frequency Radio, TFRlive.com. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope hope you can sleep well tonight. Leave the lights on if you have to. I'll be back tomorrow night, wherever you are. Make it TFR and Denny touch